Rain tapped softly against the bus stop roof as Elena Morris pulled her thin gray coat tighter around herself. Her 7-year-old son, Caleb, leaned sleepily against her shoulder while she checked the time on her cracked phone screen for the third time in 2 minutes. The late shift at the diner had ended an hour ago, but the buses were delayed again. "Mom," Caleb whispered, rubbing his eyes, "can we get hot chocolate tomorrow?" Elena smiled even though exhaustion sat heavily behind her eyes. "Maybe this weekend, baby." She hated saying maybe. Maybe usually meant no. At 34, Elena's life had become a long list of sacrifices. Since her husband left 4 years earlier, she worked double shifts at Rosie's Diner in downtown Chicago while trying to raise Caleb alone in a tiny apartment where the heater barely worked. Still, she never complained. Not out loud. As the wind pushed cold air through the bus shelter, something near the bench caught her eye. A wallet. Black leather. Expensive. At first, she looked around, expecting someone to rush back for it. But the street remained nearly empty except for passing headlights and the distant sound of sirens. Elena bent down and picked it up carefully. It was heavy, very heavy. When she opened it, her breath caught. Stacks of $100 bills filled the inside. More money than she had probably seen in years. Her stomach tightened immediately. Caleb noticed her expression. "What is it?" Someone lost their wallet. Inside were several platinum cards and an ID. The name made her pause. Daniel Whitmore. Even Elena recognized it. Whitmore Technologies. Billionaire. One of the richest men in the city. She stared at the money again. Her rent was overdue. The electric company had already sent a final warning. Caleb needed new winter shoes because the soles of his current pair were separating. For one dangerous second, temptation whispered in her ear. No one would know, not even a few hundred. Maybe just enough to survive this month. But then Caleb looked up at her with those trusting brown eyes. And Elena quietly closed the wallet. "We're returning it." Caleb smiled instantly. "Because it's the right thing." She kissed his forehead. "Exactly." The address on the ID led to a luxury hotel downtown. An enormous glass building glowing against the rainy night. Elena hesitated outside the entrance. People dressed in designer coats moved through revolving doors while valets opened car doors for wealthy guests. She suddenly became painfully aware of her worn sneakers and diner uniform under her coat. "We can come back tomorrow," she muttered nervously. But Caleb shook his head. What if he needs it tonight? Before she could second-guess herself again, they stepped inside. The lobby looked like another world. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, fresh flowers taller than Caleb. The receptionist barely looked at them at first. "Yes." Elena swallowed awkwardly. "I found a wallet. It belongs to Daniel Whitmore." That changed everything. Within minutes, security escorted Elena and Caleb upstairs to a private penthouse suite. Elena's heart pounded the entire elevator ride. The doors opened into a luxurious living room overlooking the city skyline. And standing near the windows was Daniel Whitmore himself. Tall, sharp suit, silver streaks at his temples. The kind of man who looked powerful without saying a word. But his face changed instantly when he saw the wallet in Elena's hands. "You found it." Relief flooded his voice. Elena stepped forward carefully. "Yes, sir." At the bus stop near Madison Avenue. Daniel quickly checked inside. Everything was still there. Every dollar. Every card. He looked up slowly. "You didn't take anything." It wasn't a question. Elena straightened quietly. "It wasn't mine." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her. Most people in his world lied, cheated, manipulated, especially when money was involved. Yet this exhausted woman standing before him had returned enough cash to change her own life. Without touching a dollar. Then Daniel noticed Caleb half hiding behind his mother. "And who's this?" "My son, Caleb." Daniel crouched slightly. "Did you help your mom save the day tonight?" Caleb grinned shyly. "She says honest people sleep better." For the first time that evening, Daniel smiled. A real smile, not the practiced corporate one reporters photographed. How true. Daniel stood again and reached into the wallet, pulling out several $100 bills. "Please, take this at least." Elena immediately shook her head. "No, thank you." Daniel blinked in surprise. Most people would have demanded more. "I didn't return it for money." Something about her answer hit him harder than expected. Because he believed her. Completely. Finally, Daniel nodded slowly. Then at least let me have my driver take you home. Elena almost refused again, but Caleb was already staring wide-eyed at the city lights and luxury furniture. So she reluctantly agreed. On the ride home, Caleb pressed his face against the car window. "Mom," he whispered, "that man looked lonely." Elena looked surprised. "What makes you say that?" He smiled with his mouth but not his eyes. Children noticed things adults ignored. Back in the penthouse, Daniel stood alone beside the windows after they left. The wallet sat on the table untouched. But he couldn't stop thinking about Elena. Or the quiet dignity in her voice. For years, Daniel had lived surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Business partners, socialites, even family members. Everyone calculated his value in dollars. Yet the woman from the bus stop had expected nothing. The next morning, Daniel surprised his assistant. "I want information on Elena Morris." His assistant looked confused. "The woman who returned your wallet?" "Yes." "Why?" Daniel stared out the office window thoughtfully. "Because honest people are rare." 3 days later, Elena was balancing plates at the diner during the lunch rush when Rosie, the owner, rushed toward her. "Elena, someone important is here asking for you." Elena frowned. "Important?" When she walked into the diner lobby, she nearly dropped the coffee pot. Daniel Whitmore stood near the counter in a dark overcoat, instantly attracting attention from everyone inside. Customers whispered. Employees stared. Elena approached nervously. "Mr. Whitmore." Daniel smiled slightly. "Daniel is fine. What are you doing here?" "I came to thank you properly." Before she could answer, Rosie suddenly appeared beside them acting unusually cheerful. "Elena is our hardest worker," she said quickly. "Never late. Never complains." Elena turned red with embarrassment. Daniel noticed. "I believe it." Then he looked back at Elena. "Would you join me for coffee after your shift?" She hesitated immediately. People like him didn't ask people like her for coffee. Still, something sincere in his expression made her say yes. That evening, they sat in a quiet cafe overlooking the river. At first, Elena felt uncomfortable among polished businessmen and elegant women in expensive clothes. But Daniel spoke to her differently. Not like a billionaire speaking to charity. Like a real person. He learned about Caleb, about the divorce, about working nights while studying online accounting classes she could barely afford. "You're studying accounting?" Daniel asked. Elena nodded carefully, slowly, one class at a time. Daniel leaned back thoughtfully. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I employ hundreds of people with degrees from elite universities." He paused. "But very few have your character." Elena laughed softly. "Character doesn't pay rent." "No," Daniel admitted quietly. "But it builds lives." Over the next several weeks, Daniel kept finding reasons to visit the diner. Sometimes he brought Caleb books. Sometimes just conversation. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Elena stopped seeing the billionaire. She started seeing the man underneath. A man who worked 16-hour days because he didn't know how to stop. A man whose marriage had collapsed years earlier after losing a daughter to illness. A man surrounded by luxury yet deeply alone. One snowy evening, Caleb asked a question that stunned both adults. "Mr. Whitmore." "Yes." "Why don't you smile more?" Daniel froze. Then Caleb added innocently, "My mom says sad people sometimes forget how." Silence filled the apartment. Finally, Daniel looked at Elena. "He's smarter than most adults." Elena smiled softly. "He gets that from me." For the first time in years, Daniel laughed loudly. Really laughed. Months passed. Then one afternoon, Elena received devastating news. The diner was closing. Rosie couldn't afford rising rent anymore. Elena felt panic crash over her instantly. No savings. No backup plan. No safety net. That night she sat alone at her kitchen table staring at unpaid bills while Caleb slept nearby. A knock came at the door. Daniel. One look at her face told him everything. "What happened?" She explained quietly, fighting tears she refused to let fall. Daniel listened without interrupting. Then he placed a folder gently on the table. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was an employment contract. Junior accounting assistant. Whitmore Technologies. Full salary. Health insurance. Flexible hours. Elena stared at the paper in shock. I can't accept this. Yes, you can. I'm not qualified. You're studying accounting. I'm still learning. Daniel's voice softened. Elena, do you know how many qualified people I've hired who destroyed trust the moment money appeared? She looked down silently. I'd rather train someone honest than depend on someone impressive. Tears finally filled her eyes. Not because of the job. Because for the first time in years, someone believed in her future. You barely know me, she whispered. Daniel looked at her steadily. I know enough. Elena accepted the position, and she worked harder than anyone in the department. Within months, supervisors noticed her precision, intelligence, and work ethic. But more importantly, people noticed how Daniel changed around her. He smiled more, left the office earlier sometimes, even attended Caleb's school basketball game one Saturday, cheering louder than anyone else. Employees whispered constantly. Some assumed Elena was chasing his fortune. Others assumed Daniel pitied her. But both assumptions were wrong. Because what grew between them wasn't built on money. It was built on respect. One evening nearly a year after the lost wallet, Daniel invited Elena and Caleb to a charity gala. Elena almost refused after seeing the elegant guest list. I don't belong there. Daniel looked at her calmly. You belong anywhere your honesty takes you. At the gala, wealthy guests filled the ballroom in glittering gowns and tuxedos. Elena felt nervous until Daniel offered his arm. Then something unexpected happened during his speech. Daniel stepped onto the stage before hundreds of influential guests. I built my company believing intelligence was the rarest quality in business, he said. But recently, someone reminded me that integrity is far more valuable. He looked directly toward Elena. 1 year ago, a struggling single mother found my wallet containing more money than most people earn in months. The room became silent. She returned every dollar without expecting anything. In return, people turned toward Elena, her face flushed with embarrassment. But Daniel continued, that woman changed how I see success. Then, to everyone's shock, he announced a new scholarship foundation for single parents pursuing education and career training. Named after Elena's late mother, whose story Daniel had once listened to carefully. Elena covered her mouth in disbelief. You listened to that, she whispered afterward. I listen to things that matter, he replied softly. Months later, on another rainy evening much like the first night they met, Daniel and Elena stood together outside Caleb's school concert. You know, Elena said quietly, if I hadn't picked up that wallet. Daniel smiled. You still would have returned it. She laughed softly. That's not what I meant. Rain shimmered under the streetlights as Daniel gently took her hand. For years, he said, people treated money like power. He looked into her eyes. But you reminded me kindness has far greater value. Across the sidewalk, Caleb groaned dramatically. Can you two stop being emotional and come already? Daniel laughed. Elena laughed harder. And together, they walked through the rain toward a future neither of them had expected from one lost wallet at a bus stop.